Okay. Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Tonight is Dao De Jing. We'll be covering verses 69 and 70. Please type exclamation point in the chat to read your favorite version of these two verses. We'll get started with Penny.
Okay. And this is Stephen Mitchell. 69. The generals have a saying, rather than make the first move, it is better to wait and see. Rather than advance an inch, it is better to retreat a yard. This is called going forward without advancing, pushing back without using weapons. There is no greater misfortune than underestimating your enemy.
The name of the book that you
Underestimating your
said
enemy.
was a good book that explained the meaning of life, the universe, and the political.
Sorry.
Underestimating your enemy means thinking that he is evil. Thus you destroy your three treasures and become an enemy yourself. When two great forces oppose each other, the victory will go to the one that knows how to yield.
Thank you very much for that, Penny, and I apologize. If everybody could go ahead and mute themselves while somebody else is speaking, that would be wonderful. Appreciate that. Next up, we have Evanique, followed by Brian.
Okay, so this is God as the Nature Sees God, a Christian reading by John Mabry. Chapter 69. The military has a saying, I would rather be passive like a guest than aggressive like a host. I would rather retreat a foot than advance an inch. This is called going forward without instigating, engaging without force, defense without hatred, victory without weapons. There is no greater calamity than underestimating the enemy. If I take my enemy too lightly, I am in danger of losing my compassion, moderation, and non-competitive spirit. So when two armies confront each other, victory will go to them that grieve.
Thank you, Evanique. Next up, we have Brian, followed by David.
This is a reading from D.C. Lau. The strategists have a saying, I dare not play the host, but play the guest. I dare not advance an inch, but retreat a foot instead. This is known as marching forward when there is no road, rolling up one's sleeves when there is no arm, dragging one's adversary by force when there is no adversary, and taking up arms when there are no arms. There is no disaster greater than taking on an enemy too easily. So doing nearly cost me my treasure. Thus, of two sides raising arms against each other, it is the one that is sorrow-stricken that wins. That's it.
Thank you, Brian. So next up, we have David, followed by Laura.
Yes, the thing in English. There is a saying among soldiers, I dare not make the first move, but would rather play the guest. I dare not advance an inch, but would rather withdraw a foot. This is called marching without appearing to move, rolling up your sleeves without showing your arm, capturing the enemy without attacking, being armed without weapons. There is no greater catastrophe than underestimating the enemy, but underestimating the enemy, I almost lose what I value. Therefore, when the battle is joined, the underdog will win.
Thank you, David. Which version was that again? I'm sorry.
That was the thing in English.
Okay, thank you. So next up, we have Laura, followed by Margarita.
I was going to give Madeline a chance, but she didn't.
Chivalry is dead. So Laura, followed by Margarita.
Yeah, I'm reading Wayne Dyer. This is saying almost among soldiers, I dare not make the first move, but would rather play the guests. I dare not advance an inch, but would rather withdraw a foot. This is called going forward without advancing, pushing back without using weapons. There is no greater misfortune than feeling I have an enemy. For when I and enemy exist together, there is no room left for my treasure. Thus, when two opponents meet, the one without an enemy will surely triumph. When armies are evenly matched, the one with compassion wins.
I really like that version. Thank you, Laura. Next up, we have Margarita.
Hi. So I will read the Bahasa again. I think it's similar with Ursula Le Guin. So, seorang panglima perang berujar, kami tak berani menyerang, lebih baik menerima serangan. Tidak berani maju sejengkal, bahkan mundur selangkah. Inilah yang dikatakan berbaris namun tidak maju. Tidak menggulung lengan baju, tidak menunjukkan sikap permusuhan. Tak ada bencana lebih besar daripada gemar bermusuhan. Siapa yang gemar bermusuhan akan kehilangan miliknya yang berharga. Maka bila dua pihak tentara saling bertempur, yang akan menyesal adalah pihak yang menang. Thank you.
Thank you, Margarita. What I will do is let me follow up with the Ursula Le Guin version, and then we can go to Jason, unless anyone else would like to read their favorite verse, favorite version of verse 69. Her title is Using Mystery. The expert in warfare says, rather than dare make the attack, I take the attack. Rather than dare to advance an inch, I'd retreat a foot. It's called marching without marching, rolling up your sleeves without flexing your muscles, being armed without weapons, giving the attacker no opponent. Nothing's worse than attacking what yields. To attack what yields is to throw away the prize. So when matched armies meet, the one who comes to grief is the true victor. And that is the Ursula Le Guin version. And so with that, I don't see any other exclamation points in the chat, and we'll go ahead and Jason, let me just make your host. So please, everybody mute, please. And then, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, yes.
Thank you.
All right, so chapter 69, military strategy. I think this one, if you read the Art of War, I think that's very in line with the philosophy of Art of War. Probably that's the only, in Dao De Jing probably have a lot of things related to military, but this one probably the most straightforward. Okay, so I'm going to read my translation. The maxim of military strategy is, I dare not act as a host, but prefer to act as a guest. I dare not to advance an inch, but prefer to retreat a foot. This is called marching without formation, pushing without arms, arming without weaponry, battering without enemies. There is no disaster greater than taking the enemy too lightly. Taking the enemy too lightly almost makes me lose my treasures, 3 treasures. If you remember chapter 67, talk about my 3 treasures. I think it's related. Therefore, when two evenly matched army meets, the army that mourns shall win. I think I need to mention a little bit on the last stanza. The word I, okay, means mourn or sorrow, okay. And I think some translation call it compassion. I see a few translation called compassion. So it makes sense, okay, in general, talking about if you have in the war, you have a compassion, you will win. But literally in the text, I don't think that's right. Okay, literally is not right. So, but the question comes with why the side, when 2 sides fighting, why the side mourning, okay, will win? Why? Okay, and this one become a very famous Chinese saying, right? So-called 哀兵必胜, the mourning military will win. Okay, that become a. So my interpretation is the last stanza is a warning sign to the general, to the military leader. So don't think you are on the advanced side. So that means, for example, you kill the head or general of your enemy. Then you start to feel proud and you think you are on the advanced side, and you start to take your enemy lightly. So I think the last stanza is kind of like give the warning to the military leader, don't take the enemy lightly, especially when your enemy has something bad happen, they are mourning, because that's the dangerous sign, because they might get angry, they might get focused, and then they may feel they have to revenge. So I think the last line is important and taken as a warning sign. So that's my translation, and that's it. Thank you.
It's wonderful, and yes, there's nothing like that. Somebody wants to a wounded bear that wants to take revenge, so to speak. So with that, Aman.
I don't know that I have a great deal to add. I think Jason did a excellent job, and he brought out that point that the mourning army shall win, or usually wins. I do think that it is significant that he brings this idea of mourning to bear as the motive that will move armies to victory. It almost does mean that the army that has nothing left to lose is the most dangerous. And so there's an idea of have your troops in a state of compassion, or have them, treat this solemnly and seriously, because you don't want a bunch of rowdy boys out there just hooping and hollering, thinking they're going for guts and glory, and then find themselves at the sharp end of a pole arm. But there's also a warning here that if you run your enemy into a position where all they can do is mourn their losses, they're more dangerous than they would have been meeting in an initial field. So I think it kind of cuts both ways, but it's interesting to me also that in these last chapters, we start to see echoes of the art of war, because that was so preeminent to the thinking of the people this would be taught to at the time. How do I succeed when everyone around me seems bloodthirsty and out for my neck? And Lao Tzu's advice here is, very typical Taoist advice. You do it through clarity of purpose, through parsimony of action, through careful, controlled measures. And you do it without taking things lightly, because if you think a threat is not a threat, that is when it's most likely to be most damaging to you.
Yeah, I really like your comments about the idea of controlled and measured responses, or not responses, actually, that would be the wrong way of saying it, but controlled and measured action. In Sun Tzu, one of the most famous sayings is that every war is won before the war is even fought. So this idea that if you're moving forward, that you kind of almost have an idea of what the outcome is going to be, but you're not necessarily going to do that if you're acting irrationally. Just a thought, but I'd like to hear everybody's thoughts on this one. Go ahead and type exclamation point for your takeaways now. Evanique.
I find this to oddly be peaceful in a sense. So I know it's about military and about war and about battle, but I think the approach to it is really peaceful, in that you come to it in a calm mind, and like Aman said, you're very aware of what's going on, but you're not trying to be all boastful and be like, oh, I'm the best and everything else. You're just kind of looking and seeing, okay, how do I move in a situation where, like Aman said, everybody's coming for your neck? Like, how do you move in that situation? Do you try to slay everybody like in a Kill Bill type movie? Or do you just kind of, you like it says here, you go forward without instigating, engaging without force, defense without hatred, victory without weapons. And I like that part, defense without hatred, because I think when people think of pacifists, they think, or being peaceful, they think it's just like being non-war. But no, you can still defend yourself, but only do it when you have to and know how you're going to do it. And um, it almost reminds me of like sometimes when people train, like when, especially when women, they go into self-defense classes to, figure out what to do in a situation. That way, when the situation comes, they can act rationally and they know what to do because they've practiced it. And I think of it as that. So it oddly gives me peace, because it's like, you don't have to be all aggressive about it. You just have to know how to move when somebody's coming after you. So in a weird way, it just gave me peace a little bit.
Yeah, I think I really like that, is that this idea that conflict actually needs to be avoided is something that is not something that you're the aggressor. So when you're talking about something like self-defense classes, it's an appropriate analogy here to when we're talking about this, the idea of not being the one that understanding that when you engage in conflict, that everyone loses, that it's not necessarily a good thing. So thank you for your comments, Evanique. I think next up we have Laura.
I don't know how much everybody's been following the news this week about Ukraine, but listening to this poem and listening to how Biden and the NATO have been sort of developing strategy against Russia, because now they can be one step ahead of them also. I really feel that much of what they've been doing is this kind of strategy in whether, they don't want to have war, they don't want to kill, they want it to be a diplomatic kind of solution. And I really, it kind of chilled me for a moment listening to this and hearing what I've been hearing because they've been putting their strategy out every day on TV. You can listen to how this war is going forward, or not war, but this altercation, not yet altercation, whatever it is. So you get a blow by blow of what's happening at the front. And this poem is just pretty much applicable to what we're seeing live in front of us right now. And it's quite beautiful. I mean, in its own way, war has quite, it's amazing, actually. It's a beautiful thing, even if it's horrific. But
and war should be avoided at all costs, and it actually should be quick, according to Sun Tzu. So, again, this is the idea of just not being the aggressor is very important here. So we have a couple other people in line, but first up we have Aman. Then we have Aman, followed by Kevin, Penny, and Madeline.
Thank you, Joe. And thank you, Laura, because I was actually stuck for thinking of sort of counter examples, which history is just rife with. There's so many examples of this advice being ignored. It's very difficult to prove a negative, to prove the times war has been avoided. But pointing to current events actually looks like an example of a really staunch effort to do just that. And I'd have chosen the term invasion, but it, a pig is a sow is pork. But as the counter example that really seemed to just leap to my mind is that Maxim, better to retreat a foot than to gain an inch, or better to not gain an inch and retreat a foot. I was thinking of Verdun in France, which was one of the front lines of World War I, the often neglected war that I've heard one historian refer to as the meat grinder, because it was trench warfare that would just drag on for days and days. And sometimes the battle line, the disseminating line between, the German army and the English or the French would move literally less than a foot at a time. It could move just a matter of mere inches and then reverse course in the next day because the other side would press so hard. Verdun as an area has some of the highest arsenic levels, soil levels in the world, just from munitions, from that unrelenting years and years and years of munitions firing. It has contaminated the soil, possibly, maybe not indefinitely, but certainly in our lifetimes and probably my grandchildren's lifetimes. And if that doesn't strike a more poignant note of this is why it's better to retreat a foot than to gain an inch, I can't think of anything that does, maybe with the exception of the ossuary there, where so many bones were found, they could not identify ally versus, Kaiser. So they just heaped them all into a gigantic pile. If you're ever in the east of France and you have the opportunity, it's someplace worth going because it is a abject demonstration of failure to follow this sort of advice.
Thank you, Aman. So we have a couple people in the queue here. Next up, we have, Kevin.
Thank you, Joe and everyone. I'm going to take my key cup of tea. First is 祸莫大于轻敌. There's no disaster greater than taking enemy to light. By the way, I'm going to, if we look at read so far about Dao De Jing, basically Dao is Lao Tzu against the war. That's basic. He value about the law and value about the peace. However, from a technical history, I'm going to give you a couple examples. From the Vietnam War, from the two, one is South Korea and the North Korea war, and Chinese troop against the U.S. force at that time. That time, Chinese doesn't have air control, no airplane or air force. Then the troop is from very south of China, which is very lean. It's like a high temperature. They're going to that north side, very cold, like here, but these days. There's so many people died. However, one general of U.S. said, we are going to, that time about October or September. If we're going back to our home, before Christmas celebration, right here. However, this did not happen. Another one, it's for Afghanistan. Soviet Union, I would say one time, has war with Afghanistan, didn't work out. They just you just can't conquer it. U.S. Army over there, 20 years. What do we get? What do they got? It's sad. So another last one is 哀者胜矣. That's a basic translation is the army are mourn shall win. It's sometimes we have one idiom called 哀兵必胜. Sometimes you think about it. If we think about the worst case scenario, something could be better than it happened. If you think too optimistic, we got this, we got that. Something remind me of still, because yesterday, last night, I read, I'm going to post one movie from this. I post here is one is for U.S. We translate this war. Chinese make one movie is, if you guys search from YouTube, you can find that in YouTube 2019, for the Battle of Lake Changjinghu. That's the Chinese way. It speaks so much how brutal the war. That time, like I mentioned, that guy, they frozen because you cannot move. If you move, U.S. Air Force finally going to bomb you. So they frozen over there. Then one general used the military. Oh, thank you, man. Respect each other. That time, the military during Christmas time, they have a turkey. However, in the Chinese army, in those snowland, they with potato. They try share with each other. You eat bite one. That's brutal. I heard about story, watch movie. You could cry from there. Thank you. Joe, you mute.
Thank you for that. Next up, we have Penny. Thank you for your comments, Kevin.
Yeah, this is a little bit on kind of like in continuation of what Kevin was actually saying, but I was just, again, thinking of that same section, that there's no greater misfortune than underestimating your enemy, because then you will destroy your three treasures, which we talked about before, like compassion, moderation, humility. And I think, what obviously they're saying is that, I mean, if you think you are superior and you're easily going to win, and then that's when you are in the most trouble from a military viewpoint, because based on what you think your assessment as a situation is, you think it's a slam dunk and it's no problem. But as Kevin said, in all those examples of real life history, you don't know the whole situation. You don't know exactly how the enemy is going to react. You might be thinking based on past military experience, but this war might not be fought like that. So anyway, that you have to be very careful about what your view of the situation is, because you're likely to be the one who loses and lose what you value, if you really think that you are superior and or can easily win.
I mean, this is a reoccurring theme. This is a really important point. So one of Sun Tzu's tactics is the idea of using humility to make the enemy haughty, so that they actually believe that they are in a stronger position than they actually are. So this would be the reverse. So if you're making that assumption, then you're obviously putting yourself in a position that you're underestimating your enemy, especially if you're about to go to war with someone that has nothing to lose. So it's one of the tactics of Sun Tzu is to actually make people think that they're in a much weaker position than they actually are. So then they're luring you in as the aggressor. But also something that I just want to make a quick comment about as well is Ursula Le Guin has a little bit of a commentary afterwards, and her says a piece of sound tactical advice practiced by the martial arts, just as Aikido, and by underground resistance and guerrilla forces, which leads to a profound moral warning. The prize thrown away by the aggressor is compassion. The yielder, the griever, the mourner keeps that prize. The game is loser take all. So everybody loses in war, but it also speaks to the idea of compassion that you had talked about, one of the treasures that would be thrown away. All right, I've talked enough. So with that, I am going to guess that Madeline wants to speak.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good.
What that thing that you just read, Joe, where was that from?
That was from Ursula Le Guin's commentary.
Oh, that was great.
Yeah, I can.
What Aman brought up about the First World War and the subsequent discussion, it made me think of that the final grouping of chapters in the Maoist writings, where they discuss weaponry and siege warfare. And I was wondering if Jason or Aman or someone could just talk a little bit about that, because up until now, when war has arisen as a topic in the Tao, it has really been about horses and chariots or halberds and things like that. But they did actually have siege warfare. So I'm going to give the floor to Jason or Aman just to give us some brief context on that.
Jason, you want to tackle it?
Yes, actually, I probably just about to raise my hand to talk about this issue. I think we talk about is this stanza, right? In the middle, marching without the formation, pushing without arming without weaponry, battering without enemies. I think this one is important, and it's in line with what Sun Tzu in the Art of War. Basically, is talking. If you think about the situation, basically, is talking about the war is fighting before it actually happened, right?
Right.
Before you do it, you already decide. When you in the battlefield, it doesn't matter you win or you lose, you are not in the right position. So I think that this one is important on the center on this one. So I'm not sure I direct answer Madeline's question or not, or I too much thinking about the subject I want to talk about. Madeline, am I answer your question or I'm off?
No, that is answering it, because this was one of the most baffling parts of it to me.
Oh, you think it's baffling? I think this one is very Taoism thinking in the military strategy, right? If you think about this one, it's talking about military. The retreat is more important than advance, okay? And talking about the marching without the formation, talking about the fighting without enemy, arming without weaponry, okay? I think you can imagine what kind of, how do you defend yourself without weaponry, right? So I think that's very Taoism thinking. And for the last two stanzas also take further step on like, a warning sign. Let's assume the audience is the prince or the general. Just tell the prince or the general, you never take your enemy lightly, right? And especially when your enemy is mourning, okay? They are in despair, okay? That's also important to be careful, because they probably on the winning side. So that's I take on this one. And I think this chapter is very special in the all 81 chapter, because this one probably the only one directly talk about the military.
If I can just tack on there, I was going to say, yes, I agree with Jason. And this is probably the most explicit military instruction within the entire Dao De Jing of this is what you do with an army. But to what Madeline was asking about the difference between sort of chariot and horseback warfare, she's hitting on something that was germane to the period, which was there was a transformation in the form of warfare between the end of the Zhou dynasty and Qin Shi Huangdi and the whole time of the warring states and spring and autumns. And that was warfare went from a very ritualized aristocratic affair done with horse and chariots, done in formations, done, out of a sense of pride and zeal to show off your macho character to conscripted armies battling in formations and sieging and taking over whole plots of land. That transformation in what warfare was occurred at this period in Chinese history. So you can almost imagine these were the first, generals and kings and princes and soldiers to be playing warfare with a real life full army kit or set to just take out there and sick on one another. And they were doing it very often with the same sort of, not ritualistic behaviors, but ritualistic motives that had gone before them in those sort of chariot stylized battles, where it could just be enough to show off how brave and how tough you were. Now you were doing it with the lives of hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of innocent people. And so the impetus to make a recommendation like this was more than just, an ideal. It was kind of a plea to not squander the lives of tens of thousands of people on one of these fool's errands just because you've got a wild hair and you think you're bigger and better and can go beat up on this little, guy next door, but you forget he may be friends with that really big kingdom on the other side of him. And after we've expended ourselves beating up this tiny state, guess what happens to us? We're going to have nothing but, sour grapes waiting for us by all the other people. It was thinking strategically broader than just your own honor and reputation.
Okay, so so that would mean that the Mohists, who were basically bands of knights, we'll say, when they were helping the smaller sides with things, with weaponry and with reinforcements, they were actually trying to prevent war.
Okay, Madeline, you talk about Mohism, the against the aggression war. Okay, so I did a little bit warfare during that time. The Chinese word here, the text is called 行无行. Okay, Amang and I had a little bit discussion on this word. Even it's the same word, but the pronunciation is different. Let me show the text here. Okay, so this one 行无行. Okay, so I think that's my interpretation. The first word, even they look the same, but that's different meaning. The first word means the marching. Hang probably means hang wu, that means the formation. So just like Amang said, during that time, the advance of military, you can have mass of military going on. So look at this one, just kind of thinking about the battlefield during that time. They use horse for chariot, but there's no horseback riding in China because the stir up haven't invented yet. So the fighting basically on foot soldier. That's why the Mohists can build the defense on that. So a little bit history is later time. They have the Han people, which is before Mongolia. They are on horseback. Remember, they are on horseback, but they don't use stir up. So that means they cannot use weapon on the horseback. So in the Han dynasty, Chinese still can win the horseback people because they use formation. But a few hundred later, when the stir up invented, the people on the horseback, they can use arrow, they can use weapon. At that time, the horseback soldier is just like a tank. So that's you read the history during the time, the Mongolian, Genghis Khan, there's no way to defend them because they have a stir up. So I think that's a little bit different in the military. Okay, so that's I'd like to talk about this. Yeah.
Okay, so next up, we have JP. Thank you for your patience.
I think a lot of the verses do deal with interaction between two people, mainly to try to avoid conflict or keep it peaceful. and I practice Tai Chi, and I find a lot of the verses deal with the balance and harmony of the motion, whether it's a momentary stasis or a flow. Where it talks about the 1 inch forward, I think of Bruce Lee's famous 1 inch punch. It only takes 1 inch to approach your opponent, and instead of just touching somebody, you can kill somebody in 1 inch. But stepping away a whole foot actually gives you much more strength. Taking it back, where if somebody has to come at you in a whole foot, they're going to lose their position. It'd be the same thing in a conversation if it was becoming an argument. One word can make the whole thing a vast confrontation, whereas a lot of good, peaceful words taken back a foot can help keep everything peaceful. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you. Those are some fantastic comments. I really appreciated that. And I really liked the illustration that you and the analogy that you drew with Bruce Lee's punch. And actually, it's a very interesting way to think about it too. If we're we're only talking about physical altercations, but applying this to words is actually a very interesting approach to take when you're thinking about this particular verse. So thank you, JP. Next up, I have Chris. I know, Laura, you were in the queue, but I want to give everybody that hasn't had an opportunity to speak yet go first. So with that, Chris, please.
Yeah, so I think before I make my point, just to counter what Aman and Jason said, I think that what they said historically are correct. But when I interpret that comment, that's really timeless, because at the end, they're really just saying, don't be dogmatic.
Interesting.
You know, so when you practice martial arts, you will hear this expression often called be like water, right? Because when you're, and then Napoleon, you know, and Liechtenstein both coined the phrase, right, about reacting in the fog of war, because you can learn all kind of tactics, you can have all kind of fantastic weaponries, but once the fighting starts, every time is different. And you cannot be just so devoted to a specific tactic, specific formation, specific anything. That is really the reason, you know, like why the Mongol took over a big part of the world, because we're fighting a different way and everybody was still fighting them with heavy armors, right? And then that's also why like the samurais lost to the people with guns. This example gets repeated over and over throughout history, but at the end, really the key is that, are you willing to adapt in that particular moment? That's really what I get it for that particular advice, which I think is as useful as ever. It doesn't really matter what's his historical context. And the other thing I think about too is I think a lot of people talk about striving for peace and striving for non-confrontation, but both Sun Tzu and Lao Tzu talk about this. There's a very, very important caveat, which is about preparations and readiness, because peace cannot be secured if you're not ready. Peace cannot be secured if you're not prepared. Because if somebody come over and want to take your house, you know, I'm just talking about like a pre like Thomas Hobbes kind of world, right? And if you just says, oh yeah, you know, like please don't take my house, that particular strategy could work sometimes if you're really a pursued person, but some other times it probably will not work. So you have to show the other person that even though you're a very peace and loving person, that taking your house is not going to be a very easy task, and that need to be demonstrably shown. So that's always that adage phrase that says, you know, peace through strength, because you don't want to, I think what Lao Tzu said is important, is that you don't want to take your military strength as a tool of conquering and enslavement, but you do want to have it, right? You do want to have that particular military strength, because if you don't have the military strength, right, which is, I know like always in history, there's always a minority that says, why don't we just get rid of all the armies that we have? Well, the problem is that everybody else had to agree with that particular sentiment also for that to work, right? And that hasn't happened. So I just think that's the important caveat for us to have, is that they have never said that we should do without any arms, and without the proper preparation. In fact, that is the key to everything before you can actually practice this peace and loveness.
Yeah, actually, fantastic quotes all around. I mean, there's a couple things that you really good points that you had made. And I think this idea of not being dogmatic about your approach is really important in one sense, is that you're actually using your mind over your body. And that is pretty much one of those things that we're kind of seeing here, is, as Aman has already spoken about, this idea of, rushing into battle irrationally and not necessarily thinking things through. I think that that's a really important point. And I also think it's a very important point too, is this idea of defense. The idea of defense is a very important part in the art of war. In fact, the quote's going to escape me, but I'll try and find it. But it's something along the lines of I'm not gonna butcher it. I'll look it up and try and find it for everyone. But I think those are some really great comments, and I think that that's actually you're on point, especially with the adaptability and being like water point as well. So thank you. Next up, great comments, everyone. I really appreciate everybody's comments this evening. Next up, we have Douglas, followed by Laura. Go ahead, Douglas. You're on mute.
If this phone would work, would be great. Okay, so it's kind of interesting. They were mercenaries, and some of these, that we say are very barbarian, were not really barbarian at all. They'd like to scare when they went into the villages, to scare the villagers. They were coming, like in the Magnificent Seven. You see the bad guys, and they're coming in, and people, or what are we going to do? We're afraid of them and everything. Then you have the lineup with the people who supposedly can go and settle the situation. So you have the two forces there, and I think the whole idea is to, calm the town, or calm the people down, and let them do what they need to do, get it over with and everything. So change the whole perspective on what they were going to do and how they were going to do it and so on. And they didn't want to be set in for, somebody to try to conquer them, so they were pretty strong doing what they had to do. Okay. That's mine.
Thank you, Douglas. Appreciate your comments. Yeah, I think there's, one other thing too, the idea that you're actually going into war, you're going further away from the Tao, not towards it. So this whole idea of the action that you're taking is definitely not in accordance with Lao Tzu's perspective on the world. So Laura, you're next.
I just have a lot of thoughts now after this, but I know that World War I was sort of not very, it wasn't a respected war, let's put it that way. I mean, a lot of people just thought it really was poorly fought, poorly conceived, and not worthy of much discussion afterwards. And as things brewed up and, World War II started to, get in people's eyes, a lot of the youth were very excited about it because they thought it was tremendous. And yet their fathers, mothers, etc., who went through that were very much against it and remained very silent. So there was not a lot of, nobody was in the streets cheering like there was in World War I. Nobody was out with signs all the time. the stores weren't, closing so that they could participate and stuff. So it was kind of, so oddly enough, I mean, there wasn't a lot of thought, I think, to this degree about, not going into it. I don't think there was a lot of diplomacy that was given to it. I think Hitler, he really hadn't even done much at that point. And I think there was an opportunity probably, if they didn't think that there was, that there wasn't a threat, that they could have actually prevented the war. But I think all that we were talking about now in terms of seeing that our grandeur and underestimating our enemy, we would probably all failed that during that time, as well as all these times that have happened since. So I think we're all very stupid, in that we haven't really examined sort of the art of war, from centuries before, and could have brought things to, with some sense of diplomacy. So I really have to say, I respect what's going on right now with NATO and the United States to do everything they can to deal with this thing with diplomacy, because it really is a very critical moment in history, because we have Putin who wants to, have a legacy, and he'll do anything to do that. And he wants to do this for his legacy. He wants to probably have a mini war. Won't be so many though. And it's really, I mean, I think we all have to be fearful of it. And I think, this is a very important piece of, I think a lot of people should be reading this and interpreting it and understanding and applying it right now, because I think it's so applicable. It's frightening, actually, how applicable it is today. And, it leaves me frightened to go to sleep, with this in mind, and that what is outside at this time. The Dao De Jing has just been an incredible experience in so many ways. The early poems, I think, got me very much on a personal note, and then as we move through, it's taken me through so many different directions, and now it's landing at a very critical point from a political standpoint, from our country and me personally, and probably a lot of other people I know. Anyway, that's what I have to say for tonight.
Thank you for that. I mean, great comments. So briefly, I did kind of look up a couple of quotes that were from Sun Tzu, and that may be appropriate to this particular passage. And one is, invincibility lies in the defense, the possibility of victory in the attack. Now, the second part of that we can probably discount. And the other one is, knowing the enemy enables you to take the offensive. Knowing yourself enables you to stand on the defensive. Again, this is obviously not telling you not to take the offensive, but the importance of defensive positions. But Chris, please.
Yeah, so what Laura was saying actually remind me. I was just gonna, ask just the overall audience for a question, because, when I read that saying, when Jason was going through it on the mournful army. So when two army of equal ability and size, come in contact, the mournful army usually wins, right? And the translation is correct, from the Chinese character. But I'm just thinking, really, just thinking from bias knowledge, really, wouldn't that just be the respectful or the humble army wins? Because if you're mournful, normally, either as a army or a sports team, it kind of just depends. Like, that can go a couple different ways, right? If you can muster enough anger and emotion, that might help you. But if you're dispirited, right, and kind of sad, that does not help you on fighting, because normally the commander and the leader of whatever organization that's in the fight is trying to rally his troops to be as higher energy as possible, right, for the particular context they're in, whether it's life dependent or not. So I just had a, I don't know if anybody who is more familiar with the text knows that. Yeah, I mean, other than the modern translation of that particular Chinese character, which doesn't more, in the ancient text, can they also just mean humble and respectful?
Martin and Jason.
By the text, the word called I don't think that means humble. That means mourning. Okay, during the ancient.
No, yeah, I agree. The current translation. I was just thinking during the time that he was using it, can it mean?
Yeah.
Can it have other meanings?
Well, at least when I do this translation, I spend a lot of time thinking about the last sentence. I try to avoid the common saying, so-called "I bin bi seng." That's today's language. I try to avoid the today's meaning, and by putting this chapter and put this stanza in this chapter and put this chapter in the whole 81 chapter, I draw the conclusion that the last stanza means a warning sign. That means don't see the army, they are mourning, okay, and then they probably have a good chance to win. Be careful. I think that's the warning sign. Okay, tell the prince. Okay, be careful. They are mourning. Okay, they are mournful army. Be careful. They will win. That's my personal interpretation. That's why I think that's the one. That's just my opinion. I know a lot of translation interpreter have a different opinion, but my interpretation is based on two principles. First, loyal to the original word. Secondly, I try to match the message in the entire chapter and match the entire chapter to the overall writing on the 81 chapter. Yeah.
Thanks, Jason. No, I wasn't challenging. I just want to confirm it because I wasn't sure. So that could be right. That could be the whole. I think somebody said it before. The wounded animal is the most dangerous animal in the room. Type of scenario.
I think it's worth noting that the idea of mourning or grieving, it accompanies loss of some kind. And so in this stanza, in this specific, phrase, there's an idea that if the other side, if an army, the other side or your army, if they have lost too much, then they will grieve. And in that grief, they will rally to very likely overcome even what look on paper like great odds. And probably the most poignant example I can think of is Little Bighorn, where you have an example of a people who were subjugated, pushed out, and just oppressed by a government for decades and decades and decades. And what looked like a cakewalk of a battle turned into a massacre of the US Army, a better outfitted, better equipped, better trained, quote unquote, army going up against a group who were mourning. The Sioux were in mourning over the losses that they had accumulated again and again over time. And I do believe that that's actually what Lao Tzu is warning desperately against here, is just because they look down and out does not mean you just are going to steamroll over them consequence free. It will probably wind up costing you a great deal more than you think. One other thing to add though, before you were talking, Chris, you were talking about, being prepared for defense and displaying that prepare. There's a really fine line in Taoist thought between a display of preparedness and a show of hubris. And the very next chapter, when we get to chapter 70, actually its title, Holding Jade, it comes from the last sentence in that, which is the sage wears plain clothes and carries jade in their hand. And the idea is you do not show off, you do not create a display of what you may in fact have capacity for. You want to keep that very, very hidden, because from that hidden posture is where real power will derive from.
Yeah, I agree, Amon. I think it is probably a pretty fine line, right? I think the better quote will be like, what the Theodore Roosevelt said, like, talk softly but carry a big stick. But it's not a hidden stick. Like everybody can see that I have that stick. I'm not waving the stick around to say I'm going to use the stick to hit you. I'm just having the stick just so you know I have it. I think yeah, most of the general military thinking is that a big chunk of the benefit of having a good defense is actually not to use the defense, is to have people that can see and know that you have the defense. Because if it's hidden and they don't actually know that you have it, and then you unleash it on them, that's actually not the best result that you want to have, right? Because maybe if they knew that you had it, they would never even try to attack you, which is actually the result that you want. So you don't really want that to be totally hidden. You just want to, I agree with you, you don't want to shove in their face, but you definitely want to know that you want them to know that you have it. You absolutely want them to know that you have it, or you potentially have it. Because they don't know you, if they absolutely don't know you have it, then that cancels out a big part of the benefit of having that defense.
It's an interesting balance, and thank you for your contributions there, Chris, on a number of levels. That was very interesting, and especially with the translation aspect of it as well. But just as a side note, a very interesting, my friend wrote a paper one time about how defense spending went up in China after the first Gulf War. So because they saw the display of force that the United States had with its defense, that then you saw this huge upsurge, and China was like, oh, we need to actually start thinking about this. So here's now geopolitically, we could say we're opposing each other, but in a sense, you've kind of set, by showing this force, you've actually sent a signal to the world, this is what we have. And by doing that, then everybody else actually starts to think about how do they become offensive or match that kind of might, and it leads to a much less peaceful world. So you kind of lose your element of surprise. So anyway, with those comments, JP, I'm looking forward to hearing from you.
I'm going to look at the mournful in a different light. After you vanquished your enemy, after you've lost part of your own forces, there's got to be a time to mourn, to get through it, to bury the dead, and also to rebuild on both sides. Otherwise, there was World War II after World War I. There's vengeance after there seems to be justice in war. So it's good to find that time that we should find a time to cry. Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very insightful and beautifully said. Beautifully said. And
yeah, Joseph. So
please.
I was just thinking what you said too. I'm thinking a good example. So actually, until recently, when I visit my friends in Switzerland after grad school, it was really cool because we're driving through these beautiful Swiss mountains and these Swiss tunnels and bridges. And only when we're on the bridge, up like 3,000 feet above the gorge, right? He told me, hey, by the way, all of these bridges are loaded with TNT and explosives. I'm like, is that just that particular bridge you bring me onto that you are trying to scare the crap out of me? He said, actually, no. He said the entire country is, all the bridges and tunnels are loaded with TNT and explosives, right? So people always thought that, Switzerland stayed neutral was because they were really rich. Well, actually, Switzerland very early on, sent a letter to Hitler and to Vichy government and to everybody that's involved. That says there's two things. One is my entire country is loaded with explosives. You come in, we'll blow up everything. Mutual destruction. Two, Switzerland sit at the head of the river of the Rhine, right? And they actually told Germany, if you ever try to invade me, we'll put so many chemicals into the river, we'll poison your entire population. And that's it. They really didn't do anything else, but that was enough. So to me, that's a good defensive measure to tell them that, look, we really don't want to do this, but if you come in here, we have this particular defense, which is very lethal. Where you're absolutely right. I think when we do the shock and awe, and when we went to the Vietnam War, and then the similar thing in Afghanistan, both the Russia and the US, it's more of what Aman was talking about showing off, right? We're trying to tell people how powerful, we are or they are, and basically saying that we can do whatever we want because we have these, which is like, to me, that's where you cross that fine line to go from we're a peaceful, law-abiding nation to be like we're sucks, and we can go do whatever we want because we have the biggest guns. And that's a very dangerous line to cross. I think that's probably the difference.
Great points, Chris. So I know we have Jason for only 9 more minutes. So I'm trying to think, Jason, how would you like to approach this next verse? Would you like to read and then we would go to everyone to read their version and then we can do takeaways, or Aman could actually, if he's okay with it, share after everybody reads their verse, whatever works best for you, Jason.
Yeah, I'm fine. Whatever flow. I think among we are in totally agreement, 100% agreement
on number 70.
Number 70.
Though I would love to hear Jason's take on it before he has to run away. So
okay,
we could do it in sort of a reverse form.
Let's do it in reverse form then. We can be adaptable here. See, Chris, you've actually, you've helped me out. So, so we're employing Sun Tzu's tactics. Anyway, so with that, then Jason, please, by all means.
Okay, let me go to chapter 70. I think this one is probably no disagreement at all. I think it's quite simple, at least in my opinion. So holding Jade. Jade is, whenever you see Jade, it's a precious stuff in China, ancient China, and sometimes related to the sovereignty. Okay. So my teaching is easy to understand and easy to practice, but people throughout the world cannot understand or practice. My teaching has purposes. My work has principles. Few people understand me. Few people follow my teaching. For this reason, the sage wears plain clothes outside, but holds Jade inside. I think the last stanza is the key of this chapter, because wear plain clothes, but the Jade is inside. I think that's the whole teaching. And the sage here, usually the sage means a political role model, but this one is for both political and moral, right? You talk about as a person, you don't show off and you wear plain clothes, but the Jade, the true value, is inside. Not only for a person, also for the political leader, right? So here he say I. So I think they use the word, the first sense as I. Okay, so basically it's talking about the sage would behavior like plain clothes outside, Jade inside, and also the work. Okay, looks plain, simple, but the value, the true essence, the principle is inside. Okay, so that's a double meaning on this. Yeah. Thank you.
Wonderfully put.
The only thing I wanted to add to that,
sure.
And yes, I think your translation is absolutely excellent, is we had a conversation about the choice of words for my or I a couple of chapters back. It is not the same word used throughout this chapter to express my teachings, my words, my principles. It is actually more commonly used throughout the Dao De Jing, and that choice of Wu kind of as a demarcation for the militant section of the Dao De Jing, I find very telling. And this is a return away from sort of that militant teaching only. Now there's something more profound and deep for you to learn.
So Aman, let me ask you the question. I probably not pay much attention on this. So in your interpretation, what's the difference between wu and wo, these two words?
I think "wo" is just a more antiquated way of saying I. We would have something very similar in English. We'd recognize it if someone were to say thee or thou, but we don't use that in common English now. In the same way, wu versus wo, it's a more formal way of expressing the self or I, whereas wu is more informal, and it's become the more colloquial way of using it in modern Chinese. But I do think that it is to sort of hallmark. You could almost think of it as those last 8 chapters. We're talking to somebody who's now going to go be the head of an army. But here we're returning to somebody who's going to be a prince, a sage, a role model to be followed. And so the choice of change from wu to wo is significant in my opinion. And I just wanted to mention it, draw attention to it, because it was such a issue when we talked about it previously.
Okay, that's great. I think that's provide me another thing to think about it. I probably not. I'm sorry for everybody, because if let me show the text a little bit, if you don't know what Amon and I are talking about, because
please.
my teaching, okay, and here people understand me, okay, both are the first subject, but in Chinese, Lao Tzu use different word. That's why Amon and I are talking about. So at beginning start with wu, and the later start end with wo, okay, which the first one is more formal, and that's why that's informal. That's Amon's interpretation. But I will think about, pay more attention on this, and may come out different idea later. Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Amon. Great comments. So as we had already stated, we're kind of going in reverse. And thank you, Jason, for this evening.
Okay.
I know you're about to leave, but it's always wonderful to have you. Well, okay. All right. Oh, I thought you left. I was just like, where'd you go?
I've been watching. So.
But
anyway,
okay.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you, Jason. As
always. Actually,
always,
I'm very happy to hear the criticize, because that's how I.
Oh, now we can do it actually, so we don't feel, we could feel comfortable. But Amon's here; he'll defend you adequately. And also, just really quickly, everybody, Jason hosts another meetup, the Asian Philosophies meetup, 7 p.m. on Saturdays. I can attest to it. I know it's one of Madeline's favorite meetups. So really, it's a fantastic meetup. But and what are you covering this week, Jason? Just so everybody knows before you leave.
This weekend is reading the Zhuangzi. Okay.
Is that Pin that's going to do that?
Pin is going to read this one, and
Okay.
Pin is going to read the very first chapter of Zhuangzi, so-called Happy Journey or Happy Exhaustion, Happy Running, Wandering Around. That's a very famous, not only in philosophy, also in literature. So. So that would be different flavor. So if you can tell, Pin is more focused on philosophy and the literature. I'm more focused on the pure philosophy. Okay, so I think that Pin and I can bring different flavor on the philosophy in East. So.
And again, that's on at 7 o'clock on
7 o'clock East time and 4 o'clock Pacific time. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
and
the week after we're going to back to the Yin Yang school, and probably a lot of people are interested.
Sounds exciting. I'm looking forward to it. So I'll put a link into the chat a little bit later. But now, everybody, we can go ahead and read our favorite verses. Go ahead and by typing exclamation point in the chat. Our favorite, not verses, our favorite versions of verse 70. So we have Penny, followed by Evanique. Thank you.
All right. This is Ron Hogan's interpretation here. Lao Tzu's advice was easy to understand and easy to follow, but nobody understood him or did what he suggested. His words stemmed from ancient wisdom, and his actions were highly disciplined. People didn't get that, which is why they didn't understand him, and the less they understood him, the more meaningful his advice became. That's why the masters live simply, hiding their wisdom deep within themselves.
Thank you, Penny. I was actually hoping somebody would read that verse. Next up, we have, let me see, Evanique, followed by Kevin.
So this is from John R. Mabry, God as Nature Sees God, a Christian reading. Verse 70. My words are very easy to understand and very easy to practice, yet the world is not able to understand, nor able to put them into practice. My words speak of the primal. My deeds are but service. Unless people understand this, they won't understand me. And since so few understand me, then such understanding is rare and valuable indeed. Therefore, the sage wears common clothes and hides his treasures only in his heart.
Thank you. Beautiful as always, Evanique. Next up, we have Kevin.
Maybe too early. I want to, last one. I want to ask a question, maybe later.
So you wanted to ask a question, you didn't want to do a reading?
Yeah, it's a very interesting
Okay,
for me.
well, we can circle back on that.
Okay.
So
okay.
I know, Laura, you also had an exclamation point while Iman and Jason were conversing about this verse. So I'm sorry I skipped you, but I don't know if do you want to do a reading or would you like to comment? You're muted either way. You're muted, Laura.
Laura, you're on mute.
You're on mute. Your voice really got through to her. It's so much more powerful than mine. Thank you.
Parenting voice.
My teachings are very, very easy to understand and very easy to practice. And yet so few in this world understand and so few are able to practice. My words have an ancestor. My deeds have a Lord. The people have no knowledge of this, therefore they have no knowledge of me. This is why the sage dresses plainly, that even though his interior is filled with precious gems.
And I'm assuming that's the Wayne Dyer version, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for sharing. David.
Anytime.
Yes, so the Fing in English version. My words are easy to understand and easy to perform, yet no man under heaven knows them or practices them. My words have ancient beginnings, my actions are disciplined, because men do not understand, they have no knowledge of me. Those that know me are few, those that abuse me are honored. Therefore, the sage wears rough clothing and holds the jewel in his heart.
Thank you very much, David. Let me see. I don't see anybody else. Oh, Margarita, forgive me. Go ahead.
Thank you. I like this verse. The Bahasa Indonesia is similar also with Ursula Le Guin. Okay. And in Indonesia, Jade is giok. So it's quite nice. Pengajaranku sangat mudah dimengerti dan sangat mudah dipahami. Tapi orang tidak mau mengerti dan tak mau menjalani. Pengajaranku ada pokoknya. Pengajaranku ada dasar dan tujuannya. Karena mereka tak mengerti pokok dan tujuannya, mereka tak mengerti pengajaranku. jarang yang mengerti pengajaranku, sedikit yang melakukan pengajaranku. Maka seorang bijak yang tampak sederhana, tapi di dalam dadanya tersembunyi giok yang berharga. Thank you.
Thank you, Margarita. I don't see anybody else typing exclamation point in the chat, so I will go ahead and actually read the Ursula Le Guin version, since it actually is very similar to what Margarita had just shared with us. Her title is Being Obscure. My words are so easy to understand, so easy to follow, and yet nobody in the world understands or follows them. Words come from ancestry, deeds from a mastery. When these are unknown, so am I. In my obscurity is my value. That's why the wise wear their jade under common clothes. Okay, so we've actually heard a little bit of commentary already by what Jason has shared. So go ahead and type exclamation point to talk a little bit about your takeaways on this. I know Kevin, Kevin, you've been waiting.
I think Elena wanted to read.
Yeah. Oh, Elena. Oh, forgive me, Elena. Did you want to read? Elena?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, please, if you want to read, forgive me. I apologize.
Sure. Yeah, I'll read one of the translations.
Oh, great. Thank you.
My words are very easy to understand and very easy to put into practice. Yet, no one in the world can understand them or put them into practice. Words have an ancestor, and affairs have a sovereign. It's because people are ignorant that they fail to understand me. Those who understand me are few. Those who harm me are honored. Therefore, the sage, while clad in homespun, conceals on his person a priceless piece of jade.
Beautiful, well read. And who wrote that? I'm sorry.
It's the year 1963, and it's someone who is called DC Lau. So someone who is a native speaker.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're
for
welcome.
Sharing.
Mm-hmm.
So now with that, we are going to go to comments. There was a lot of discussion about the last line. I'm sure that will come up. But I'm going to let Kevin go first, only because he had an explanation point about a half hour ago. So, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. This chapter is, it looks simple, but it's, actually, Jason asked question I want to ask. This one chapter appears to I, like one war, then I want to explain. Also, last sentence, I'm curious, also, 是以圣披和而怀玉. For therefore, the sage wear the ordinary people clothing, plain clothing, but hold jade. Then that's like here's a sage, sage, right? Normally, as a courtesy tradition, we don't call you that high level. I'm sage. I got wisdom. I prophet. So this, I'm not sure. That's I would hear you guys are special amount. How do you interpret this? Also, if modern practice for sure it doesn't work. Let's see if normally we interview, we wear clothing, formal suit, right? Not wear the then even we don't know what you have. You have to formal appear. Appearance good. So I'm gonna pause here. Would you hear you guys thought about this? If something didn't connect, maybe we aren't translation, we lost translation, or I try image you what's the picture of that time. Thank you.
Did you want me to respond to that before we go on?
Yeah, that would be
Absolutely,
That
yeah,
would be
thank you very
appropriate.
So the way a person of worth was recognized in this time was typically by their finery and their lack of sort of coarse cloth, dirty nailed plebeian. If you weren't that, you were a person of letters, and the more you had achieved, the more finery you could assume, the higher your position, et cetera, et cetera. And so what the message here is, the real sage, the person who's really worth knowing, is someone whose value is held on the inside. Their jade is kept, not necessarily exposed for the world. They have it, it's there, they can show it to you and share it with you, but it's not going to be the person that you would seek to ask or seek to approach typically to look for. It's also not going to be somebody who is necessarily in hiding. They are as plain and as unremarkable as anyone else around you, but they're that you should be sensitized to it now. It should communicate to you. You should be able to look at this otherwise plain figure and say, oh, that person holds real treasures, and be able to approach them to find wisdom, find that true Tao nature in them. And Chuang-Tzu touches on this in many of his parables, where his key figures are very lowly figures, like butchers or carpenters, or people who would be overlooked and assumed to be unremarkable. And what Lao Tzu's hinting at here is that the true holder of the Tao, somebody who really knows how to follow the way, really possesses Jade, does not come off as remarkable, doesn't come off as showing off or trying to display it. They really are someone who you might overlook unless you got that sort of spidey sense tingling that said, no, there's something of genius at work here. There's a whole series of YouTube videos showing people performing daily tasks with incredible levels of skill, whether it's cooking food at a street cart, or loading up cinder blocks or cement bags. But it's this whole series that shows these people doing it with such virtuosity that it's a pleasure to watch. And I think that is what this wears plain clothes. The outer appearance is unremarkable, but there is jade within this person's grasp. They possess it within. I grant you, feels much harder to do in a contemporary society where we put so much more stake on appearance than we probably did before. So that if you're not in a suit and tie, you're not even going to be, your words won't even be heard. But that may explain, at least to a degree, my self-consciousness about turning on the camera on a Tuesday evening after my shower, but not so much on a Sunday when I actually have a chance to, put on real clothes. So a bad Taoist I often am.
Those are great comments. Well, Evanique and I both agree that you're really good looking, so you could pull it off no matter what. So either way, so don't worry about it. Yes. So anyway, with that, let's go to Laura next. There's a lot of interesting comments that we could actually follow up on. I do want to come back to, again, this is a pretty important line throughout. I think that this is something that is kind of is a recurring theme throughout the Tao, this internal versus external. But we'll go next to Laura. Oh, wait a minute. Did Laura just disappear? Sorry, I might have my screen up.
Yep, she's gone.
Laura's no more.
Oh, wow. I guess she's not going to comment. So with that, let us go to Katie.
Yeah, I'm gonna quibble over a small detail in Stephen Mitchell's because it helps me make my point. He says your intellect will never grasp it. I think that's not true. I think it's like your intellect is precisely what will grasp it. But then it's like whether you like people will be able to grasp the intellectually the principles that they need to know, but then the question is, do they put it into practice? This is where it becomes tricky. And I see like a good parallel between like the Tao is not something that you'll ever fully be able to wrap your mind around. You could only experience it, but then also like implementing the principles like to 100% is something beyond our grasp too. That was the parallel with the Tao.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I'm looking at the Stephen Mitchell version right now, and we'll come back to that. Margarita.
Yes, actually, I have question just like Katie.
Okay.
One question number one for Amon, maybe, and also other people about this Jade. It's quite interesting. Is it similar with the first chapter 67 of Treasure, the three treasure? Because I think it's quite unique because now.
No, it's not the same word.
It's not the same. I know it's not the same word, but is it related or how does that reflect, something that is worthy?
Jade is kind of a stand-in for something most precious. It's not the same as Bao, like as in the three treasures, which are more, you can think of treasure as multitudinous. There's many versions of treasure. Jade is one particular precious thing. And my training of reading the Dao De Jing was, I was always told, when you read Jade, just take that to mean Tao, because that is the most precious thing that Lao Tzu is trying to impart in the teachings. I'm not saying that that is the way it should be understood, but it is a way to understand it that makes it easier.
So can we infer the three treasure is like the virtue that we need to cultivate in order to find this Jade, the Tao?
I think that's an excellent way of interpreting that.
Okay.
Could you repeat that actually, Margarita, please?
Sorry?
Could you repeat your last sentence really quickly?
Oh, so could we understand the three treasure as the or virtue that we need to cultivate in order to find the Jade, the true treasure, the Tao? So
the true
or
essence
Tao.
of the Tao itself. That is beautifully put. Thank you. Next up, we have, let's see who we have. Madeline.
Okay. Let's see. Well, first on the Jade. When I think of Jade, I think of something that has a grain in it. It can have like a grain, like wood grain, or currents like water. In other words, it has its own internal shape and flow. So I loved what Aman said about just take it as representing the Tao. This chapter reminded me, the last line reminded me of chapter 20. Others have more than they need, but I alone have nothing. I am a fool. Oh, yes, I am confused. Other men are clear and bright, but I alone am dim and weak. Other men are sharp and clever, but I alone am dull and stupid. Oh, I drift like the waves of the sea without direction like the restless wind. Blah, blah. I am different. I am nourished by the Great Mother. So it seems to be, to me, there's a very strong link between the two chapters, saying that in the exterior sense, in comparison to everyone else, I am all of these lowly things. I'm wearing homespun. I have dirty fingernails. but I have the jade inside, nourished by the Great Mother.
Thank you, Madeline. You know, it's funny that I know that this, I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer to anything, you know, to our interpretation sometimes, but I thought about number 17. Oh, here's the most important person. There it is. Our most important person. Welcome, Shrikant. It's wonderful to have
Hi
you.
there.
Welcome. It's good to see you. It's
Thank
always
you.
wonderful to see you.
Thanks.
I was just going to mention that I really kind of thought of number 17 before we go to Evanique with this particular verse. And it was talking about how that the people feel like they have done it, where they have achieved without any unnecessary speech. The leader is barely known. And there's this idea that the exterior was, you know, allowing everybody else to feel like they had achieved something versus someone else having to be very verbose or, you know, kind of always overt about whatever actions that they were taking, that the people themselves have actually felt like they were accomplishing a task. Might be a little bit off with that, but that was what it made. It caused me to recall number 70 was number 17. But I like the parallel that you have drawn with number 20, Madeline. So we have Evanique up next.
Yeah, when Margarita was talking and she was talking about the jade also being a symbol for the Tao, and I was thinking, I was like, yeah, that would be true, because if you look across religions and you're talking about the center and the periphery, and I promise you, I'm not saying it just because you're here. I had it planned, but because the God is in the center in like the Bible, the Tao, and the Gita. It's all comes from the center. It all comes from inside you. So it's hidden in the best place. And you know, when it talks about you're not adorned, if you look at especially the Bible and Jesus being the figure there, he wasn't well adorned at all. He was a carpenter, and yet he held the treasure of God in his heart. And there was a lot of, and I think of the Bible in particular, where there were a lot of people like the Samaritan woman that had God in her heart, but was not regarded well by society. So I just thought of that when Margarita was talking a little earlier, and I just was out of curiosity looking up Jade, right? So I just Googled it, and it says here, Jade is believed to have several benefits, including increasing fortune, grounding, and enhancing maturity in relationships. And so I think, you know, those could all be godlike qualities. So if you're hiding the jade or the treasure or God in your heart, you're protecting it in a sense, and you're not showing it to everybody, because not everybody's ready to take it. The Bible says don't throw pearls to pigs, right? If people are not ready to hear it, then, you know, why would you share it? And I think the reason why people don't hear it, because it requires them to let go of their ego a little bit. And so that's what I wanted to say, because I know other people want to talk. So
I mean, thank you for sharing that. You know, one of those saying is that the rich and powerful have more difficulty to getting into heaven than the poor and the meek. So I had actually not thought of it from a Bible perspective, that this idea that Christ is this carpenter, not necessarily something as a king as people would have anticipated the Son of God to be, that it was something that it was just like an everyday ordinary person. Thank you for sharing that. Great comments. Next up we have Margarita. followed
Yes.
by Madeline.
Just going to follow Evanik. When I went to China, I remember, oh, this is the land of my great grandfather, and I got myself a jade. And they say also it's also beneficial for your health. So I like the idea. One thing when I read this, just like Joe said, this is repetition of idea that even though it's simple, but not many people will follow it. Even though it's obvious, but people will reroute to other ways. They don't take the easy route. So there's some kind of pessimistic that people can understand Tao. It seems that even Lao Tzu thinks that perhaps not many people will follow it. So and then what might take, just like Evanik say, maybe people not ready to let go their ego. Right. So that seems like when we took this path of try to obtain Jade by growing your virtue, it will be a lonely path to go. It won't be that much of celebrated, probably. Perhaps people will see us, people who seek for the Tao as failures because they're so weird. So maybe, for example, I can imagine if people don't see the symbolic meaning of this, the sage wear plain clothes and holds jade inside, perhaps what they will think that in order to follow Tao, you need to wear moderate clothes and use jade just like me. I'm not sure whether this pessimistic something that we need to think.
I actually, it's something that I have a note here myself, is that it felt like Lao Tzu was actually despairing in this particular verse, that and that he was of the mind that people would follow their ego, not necessarily follow the Tao. So that there was there was just this definite and it goes back to what Evanik was saying again, with the center and the periphery, and people managing themselves to externals, not internals. And we've actually talked about that a little bit already. Yeah, thank you. Those are great comments. So next up, I believe Madeline would be next. Yes.
Yeah, I just got a little bit curious and started looking around online to see where jade would fit in the 5 element system, because we tend to think of precious gems as being more like metals, something that's mined. But so I'm thinking of either earth or metal, but I think metal was a later addition. It had initially been the 4 element system. So I think it would fit into the earth category. And unfortunately, Joe, you called on me before I could refresh my memory as to what the earth category means. But it does have a grain like wood and like water.
Yeah, actually, Kevin just put in the chat, jade is like water. But if you want to come back to your point, feel free to type exclamation in the chat. Aman, do you want to comment?
There are 2 things. And first, Kevin beat me to it. Yes, in Wuxing, the 5 phases, 5 transformations, jade would be most like water. It is associated with the treasure of Jing, with the kidneys, with all of the connotations of the water element and the water phase within the Wuxing, which is a further breakdown of the yin-yang dynamic. It's just yin at its most quintessential yin. Earth is the axis point from which yin and yang revolve from one into the other. It's the returning point for both. And you can think of it as sort of the axis mundi of that dynamic. But no, jade would not be the stone or gem or associated with it. Yellow's the color. You'd probably have something like burnt umber as the gemstone to attach to it. But what I actually wanted to get at was what Margarita and Ebonique were talking about this idea. This is one of my favorite chapters of the Dao De Jing, just for that opening line that, you know, my teachings are really easy, but nobody can understand them and nobody can practice them. And it's because they're easy that nobody can understand them and nobody can practice them. And what I think Lao Tzu gets at here is that not only ego is going to get in the way, idolatry is going to get in the way. People of this time wanted something to worship. They wanted something to be able to sacrifice to so that the rains would come, so their army would win, so that the Tao doesn't offer that. It doesn't give you that. The teachings are very simple. The Tao is a prescription for how to approach life. But most people can't follow that prescription because they have too many of their own vested interests in ego. They have too much desire to offshore some of their own responsibilities to higher deities to take care of them, to do for them. And Lao Tzu, I believe, even knew at the time, if there were such a person, that he was in danger of becoming that person. And that is exactly what actually happened. They couldn't deify the Tao, they wound up deifying Lao Tzu. There are sects of Taoists who still worship Lao Tzu as a divine figure, which is probably something he would have hated more than anything else in the universe. And he makes it clear in this chapter that if you're a real sage, you're not adorned, you're not decorated, you're not worshipped. You're as Joe Schmo as the next guy. You just have something precious within your possession and you'll happily share it. You don't display it, you don't hide it. You just hold it and share when asked. And I think that's really what I love about this chapter of the Tao Te Ching, is that it is the no proselytizing chapter more than any other one in the Tao Te Ching.
Beautifully put. Great comments. It is interesting how the Tao is so easy to follow, and it's so accessible to us, and yet we go around looking for idols and people to worship, when true tranquility and peacefulness is right among us. It's right in front of us, I should say. JP.
I'm wondering if Lao Tzu is trying to get our attention by distracting us like a magician with a sleight of hand. He says his words are hard to understand, but should be prized, right? And then he starts talking about the sage wearing coarse clothing, but holding the treasure in his heart, as if to say to me, I'm hearing, he's saying, you're trying to understand my words yourself, but you're seeing the coarse clothing. You've got to see the jade underneath all these words, where he says words have a certain origin. We need to go back and understand really what all these things are about and how they connect. And the deeds have a root because we lose control as to what they're really trying to say. And so he says, see the sage in the coarse clothing. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm still talking about words having a certain meaning. So don't see the coarse clothing of the sage I'm talking about. See that the words really have a true jade in them. And jade is a stone that can be changed, easily sculptured. Thank you.
Thank you, JP. Katie.
Yeah, I think what JP was saying reminded me of an earlier chapter where we were talking about like it would be hard to recognize who like from externals who knows the Tao. That was really my only small point, was that the jade's something internal and the plain clothes is external, meaning like you wouldn't be able to recognize from the outside.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, with the comments and the fact that it is internal, And this is, again, this is a common theme we've actually seen throughout the Tao. And I think actually I skipped Shrikant by calling on Katie. So I'm going to stop right there. Forgive me, Shrikant, my
Oh,
friend.
that's all right. That's all right. So I also, this is also one of my favorite poems. So I'm going to read Yasuhiko's translation. My words are very easy to understand and very easy to practice. Yet the people of the world can neither understand nor practice them. My words point to a source and my deeds a master. Yet the people of the world know neither the source nor the master. Thus, they know not who and what I am. But for the few who know, I am precious. Therefore, the sage may wear coarse clothes, but will always hold a luminous treasure within. I think this is, this keeps pointing to the fact that the lines of nature are very simple, and we deck ourselves. Okay, I'm going to take a little bit of liberty and read you a poem from Rabindranath Tagore that leads to this, because the idea of a child, the simple play of a child along very natural lines is very much of a Taoist concept. And Rabindranath Tagore captures what happens to most people beautifully here. The child who is decked with princess robes and who has jeweled chains round his neck loses all pleasure in his play. His dress hampers him at every step. In fear that it may be frayed or stained with dust, he keeps himself from the world and is afraid even to move. Mother, it is no gain, thy bondage of finery, if it keeps one shut off from the healthful dust of the earth, if it rob one of the right of entrance to the great fair of common human life. So this idea that we have all these forms and people have all these forms and we are holding on to them and we are decking themselves with it. We're trying to take care of them. And in so doing, we miss the living force, the living principle. And when you look at somebody who has, when a person who is decked with all these clothes, they look at somebody like what Lao Tzu is talking about. He has nothing. He has no fine clothes. He has nothing to show off. And they see only that. And the true treasure of actually living, having that living force in them, is completely lost.
It's beautifully put. It's beautifully put. Go ahead, please, Amon.
I think that poem really nails on the head some of the facade of finery that Lao Tzu is certainly indicting in this chapter, and what it is cutting most of these so-called sages off from. I am going to have to check out here for the evening briefly, but I did want to say one other reason why I really adore this chapter. There's and I want to offend no one by saying this, but there is a propensity for translators to want to get very creative with the Dao De Jing. And I understand the impulse to do that. This chapter, more than any, throws the e-brake on them from doing that, because it pretty explicitly says, if you're overcomplicating my words, you aren't transmitting it right. You're not doing it justice. You're being a facade, not a sage. And so this is the chapter I like to think of as keep them honest, boys, sort of as the subtext. When I feel like every translator who's ever gone through the Dao De Jing gets to this point and says, uh-oh, time to go back and try and keep it true to form. But I need to take off for the evening. It was great seeing you all.
Hey, thank you, Aman. Thank you as always.
I will see you next Tuesday. Have a great night, all.
All right. Always an honor for
Say
you to
Dem.
be here.
Bye, Amon.
Bye, man. Well, I'm going to leave it there. I mean, I'm not going to try and top that. I will say only one thing is that I had a really long day, but I'm feeling very energized by this meetup this evening. This was a lot of fun. I enjoyed number 69 and 70, and I have a lot of new insights onto 70. So thank you everyone for attending. And before we go though, Srikant, I know you want to talk about some of the upcoming.
Yes.
We got some great new series going.
I
Go
have
ahead.
some really remarkable news. Okay, I have several remarkable things. Number one, I, along with Mark Stallman, we're trying to come up with a new medium that we are calling Scribal Hyperbook. See what happens. I was talking to a friend today about the way in which Bible was read before print in the context of a community where people would actually, the books were very rare to come by. So you would actually have to go to a church in order to have a Bible. You would not have your personal Bible. And then you would actually talk about it. And there would be this entire community around the text. And there was conversation and there was writing and there is all of that. When you have a book of your own, you're kind of reading yourself, and you kind of separate it out, both from the entire context of life, other people reading the book, the author himself, the text. Is right. What we're doing with Dao De Jing here is exactly that. All of us are reading it. All of us are looking at all the translations. We are talking in depth, but there is something missing, and that is a loop back into writing. So we are going to the new series that we are doing. I'm doing an experiment with Mark. We are actually going to start publishing it as a hyperbook. So Peter Berkman, who is very, very good and he knows the subject. The subject is going to be digital Catholic social teaching. So this is like, how does religion, what happens to religion in the digital age? And so what is going to happen is that I have worked with Mark so that we are dividing the entire presentation into questions. So it'll be basically just questions. And there will be slides with the question and the points that Mark makes. So the entire video would be a series of questions. The presentation would be a series of questions. Then again, everybody asks questions. We will record all the questions. Then there will be answers to the questions. So everything will be based on questions. That's number one. The second point is that Peter is going to be taking class notes. Evanik, you're a big fan of Aquinas. The Aquinas, what we are reading in Aquinas is actually lecture notes of Aquinas at University of Paris. So Aquinas is giving the lecture and one of his assistants is actually taking notes. And what we have are his notes. So Peter is going to be doing exactly that. So when we publish the video, we will publish the notes and we will publish the slides. We will divide the video up by questions. So you can zoom into any questions. And then, so it will be published as a Scribble Hyperbook, to just right at the start off with the written notes, the video itself, all the questions broken up, and links into the question part. And also the audience questions will also be broken up. So you'll see on the page all the questions that were asked and links to the answers to all the questions. So it will become like a written version right away. And then next step is to allow interaction with that. So comments with that, we would kind of go and do that, and then somehow do like a next, later on, maybe do another kind of conversation based on the questions that come up, something like that. Working on that, but it's a very big step as far as I can see, because it's this loop between written and oral, between what is going on inside your mind and by talking, and the power of the written word, going back and forth, keeping on improving the writing, improving the talking through this feedback loop. And Mark Stallman is fantastic. So I'm just delighted to be working with him, because he and I, we get along very well, and we keep on bouncing ideas off each other. So this is what I've come up with, and he's agreed. The original idea of Hyperbook was his idea, but I've taken it and made it into a kind of a live Hyperbook. So we'll be launching it. So that we are starting this Sunday at 3 p.m. Eastern time. It's an 8-session course. So don't miss that. So that's very, very special. Next, Evanique and Joe, this is for you and for anybody else who is interested in the Gospel of John meetups. I don't know if you guys saw it, but I did this conversation with my friend Nick on John 1. Okay. And it is just so incredible. I can't believe it. Okay. And then Evanique suggested, I asked everybody, what direction should we take the Gospel of John meetups in? And Evanique's suggestion was to do Aquinas on John 1. And I made the mistake of starting reading Aquinas commentary on John 1. And I'm telling you, it is just blowing me away. Okay, so we are going to have to do that. Okay, he has done 16 lectures on John 1. The first lecture is on, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That's it. There's like 15 to 16 pages of commentary on just that. And all of it is incredible. So I want to do a meetup on that. I want to do John 1:1 in a certain way. My friend Peter Berkman, he knows John very well too. So I'm doing a meetup with him, just a one-on-one conversation with him, because I wanted to go very deep, where he's going to take the way he's looking at it. And actually, I've also started looking at it that way. See, John is like an eagle, right? John is eagle in terms of the four beasts, and he's the eagle. So he goes at like 30,000 feet and then he swoops down. Okay, John 1 is basically him being, skyborne. Okay, and if you look at pieces of it, there is pieces of everything else in there. So it's like an overview of the whole thing. Okay, at a very high level. So what I want to do is I want to do John 1 and then bring in other things as we go on. That's what Peter is going to do. Peter is going to kind of look at like the key points, what he calls causes operating in each of the chapters, and keep relating it back to John 1. So what I want to do is I want to just take Aquinas commentary and just go through John 1 as Evanique was suggesting. So I'm very excited about it. So we'll have to figure out some time to do that. The Bhagavad Gita meetups are just at a completely different level. Thanks to Yogeshwar, plus my taking on, Naneshwar's commentary. I think it is truly, I didn't think it would get this good, but it is already, and I'm just getting started. I'm trying to do live translation of Naneshwar, which is it's a lot of fun. So I'm finally getting, each time I'm improving a little bit. Originally I started out with kind of a more expanded translation. Now I've gone to pretty much close to Naneshwari that I start reading and trying to translate from. The next time I'm going to try to do the translation without actually reading the Marathi. I want to see if I can do that fast enough. So I'm going to try that. But in any case, it's just incredible. And Yogeshwar keeps on doing, amazing things. So that is on Fridays at 9 p.m. and Saturdays at 9 p.m. So, and then of course, Yasuhiko is coming back on March 6th at 11 a.m. to talk about 3 of my favorite topics, all combined together. So he's going to be talking about polymathic autodidactic spirituality. So how do you practice spirituality in an autodidactic manner using all the fields available to you? So that's what is coming up. So on John 1, I just want to ask you, there are a lot of us here who are in very much interested in John 1, in Gospel of John. So comments, what do you guys think about? Because I think what happened is that we started the meetup. Same thing happened with the Gita meetups. We started the meetups, we were at a certain level, and then we have now gone to a completely different level. And we will probably have to go back and do the earlier chapters again. The same thing we are doing with John 1, because John 1, when we do this with Aquinas, I'm telling you, it's just incredible. So let's start with Evanik and anybody else who wants to comment. What do you think about the idea of doing John 1?
I love it. I think I started reading a little bit on my own, and I'm just getting so much out of it already. So I think it will be very interesting to see. And the simple fact that there are 16 lectures, which I did notice on John 1, so much so that in the book that I have, it just has its own chapter of its own. It's just like amazing. So I love it, not just because I suggested it, but the way you explained it. And Peter, who you're going to have helping you with that, I think it's going to be an amazing meetup. I'm looking forward to it.
Wonderful. Joe, what do you think?
I think it's I mean, again, I'm in full agreement. When we were corresponding about this a little bit earlier, I thought this was, this is one of those things that we had to revisit after, starting it and then integrating the Aquinas translations. Not to do John 1 would be not to do it justice. So I think that this is, it's just trying to figure out what day of the week that we're going to squeeze it in now.
We'll have to figure it out. I mean, how about I email you and Evanik and let's figure something out. Okay, I can give you a preview. Would you guys like me to give you a very short preview?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Okay. All right. So this is going to be very tough. Okay. This is my summary of lecture 1. So all we're talking about here is okay. I'm going to try this. Okay. Let's see how it works. This is very, very ambitious. Okay. I'm going to try to summarize my understanding of John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. Okay, that's all we are talking about. Now, this is what blew me away. So what Aquinas is saying is, imagine God, the Father. He's conscious and he's thinking of himself with a word. Now, word, there are two senses of the word. One word, you can say word is something which is spoken out aloud. But there is also an idea of notion, what happens in your mind before you speak. So it is that kind of a word at this stage. So God is thinking about himself. And that thought is the word. Now, what is being said? In the beginning was the word. In the beginning was the word. The best way to understand this is to understand mother and a child, because we can see that in the physical world. The mother is not a mother until the child appears. So the act of giving birth produces the mother and the child and the love between them. So Aquinas says, for God the Father, understanding himself, conceives the word. And so God the Father did not exist prior to the Son. Okay, so you can see that three things are there at the beginning. There is the Father, there is the Son, and the love between them. Just like there is mother, the daughter, and the love between them. It's a reciprocal love. Now, the Son, the Word, he uses the word consubstantial. It's the same kind, because it's God thinking about himself. That is what it is. At the same time, it is a word. That means it can be spoken out. And it can become flesh. Okay. The Son, to describe it in a slightly different way, the Son is called the brightness of the Father, the brightness of his glory. Son always coexists with the Father. For brightness indicates his unchangeability. Birth points to the Word himself, but the name Son suggests his consubstantiality. So he's of the same kind as the Father, because it's just Father thinking about himself. So the Word is that. Now, each of the words he looks at here, the preposition in signifies a certain intrinsic union. So in a sense, the Word is in the Father. But at the same time, he's saying that the Word was with God. So what does with mean? With, actually, when you translate it, is that it is actually beside. So what it is saying is that it's a different being. So there is the Father and the Son, They are different beings of the same kind. They are God. Both of them are gods. So the Son is God, the Father is God. But they are with means it's separate. And it is the separation that creates the bond between them, which is the Holy Spirit. So you see, like the Trinity comes into being right in the beginning itself. The preposition in signifies a certain intrinsic union, whereas the preposition with implies in a certain way, an extrinsic union. And we state both in divine matters, namely that the Son is in the Father and with the Father. So he's in the Father and with the Father. Here, the intrinsic union pertains to the consubstantiality. He too is God. But the extrinsic union refers only to a personal distinction. So it's a different being. Because Son is distinguished from the Father by origin alone. And so these two words designate both a consubstantiality in nature and distinction in person. Thus, the Word is called God absolutely because he is God by his own essence and not by participation as men and angels are. So it's not that he becomes God. He is God right in the beginning. So all of this is in the beginning. But John says that he always existed with the Father, and the Word was with God, and the others show him as man. He's now distinguishing between the Gospel of John and other Gospels. So the other Gospels show him as man. They gave glory to God, who had given such authority to men. But John says that he is God, and the Word was God. And the others say he lives with men. While living in Galilee, Jesus said to them. But John says that he has always been with the Father. He was in the beginning with God. So that's a quick overview. What do you guys think?
It was beautiful. I do remember reading in the Aquinas commentary the part about the other three Gospels focusing on God. Focusing on Jesus, like in his actions as being a man on earth. And then John took the different route of showing that he is God because there was, certain people that were saying that Jesus was not divine. So I do remember that. And I think the most interesting thing about what you said was when you said that Jesus couldn't, like that God couldn't be here without Jesus. You were the part about that relationship. And I think I like the part too about God being one and Jesus being the other, and the Holy Spirit, which is the love between God and Jesus coming in. I thought it was beautiful. I'm really looking forward to having this meetup.
Another way of looking at it is existence and consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's what I was
we're saying
thinking.
here is that there is nature.
Yeah.
It is what it is, and it is conscious. So it is God is existence and consciousness. And it is talking about the relationship between them. So those, and the idea that all these three things come together in the beginning, they were there right from the beginning itself. That's the nature of things. That's very profound. Go ahead, Joe.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's the idea of becoming self-aware and its consciousness in and of itself. And I I mean, I had thought of it in terms like this, but then in the beginning was the word. Again, it's like the word is this idea where you're starting to be able to think, and it is like it's who I am, and then that feeds into the Trinity as well. I can see how it arrives at the Trinity much more clearly. Now that we do have to do this. I have to go back and know this is
Okay, can I say one more sentence?
This is such a breakthrough for me. I'm actually gonna stay up probably.
Can I say one more sentence?
Please.
Okay, I'm going to say one more sentence. This is what is beautiful about Aquinas. Okay, that each sentence, and this is what is beautiful about the Gospel of John. Okay, all things were made through him. Now we're talking about the Word. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. So all things were made through him. So what the idea is that you can see that there is function and form together, and it never separates. So this is the unit through which things are made. So everything is made through Word, and Word has both the spirit and matter. So Word is going to become flesh, and it's going to have both these things together. So I mean, it just goes on like this. Okay, but I mean, the other thing is that please do look at this video by Nick, because he has not read Aquinas, yet he has done. No, he is not. But he has done a lot of study and a lot of thinking on his own, and he has looked at many different things. Elena, you had a comment.
Yes, I just thought what a great discussion, and though it's not Dao De Jing, but it's all the same by speaking about the same thing in different languages, in different philosophical concepts. And you're welcome. And then I thought, word as the first word of God was necessary to create ego.
No, let's not go there. It's
and again,
Elena, these look, we are talking about the words here are so powerful that it's going to be very tough to talk about it gently. And I mean, the thing is, it's very, very difficult to talk about these things. So what I would say is that let's read Aquinas. And once you read Aquinas, I'll be happy to discuss it with you. Because what happens is that these words, otherwise things will get messed up. I don't, with the meetup, we'll be able to go through it in detail, but it's very difficult without that, because what happens is that all these ideas like ego, etc., are much later. Here we are operating at a very high philosophical level of saying, what is existence? What is consciousness? What is the relationship between existence and consciousness? So, so that's where. Does that make sense to you, Elena?
There is nature, right, and there is God, and there is other components to it. And
look,
again,
I mean, the thing is that Aquinas will say, look, there are these 12 different approaches you can have, and he analyzes all of that. So what I would say is, let's approach it that way. Let's approach it that way, because what happens is that, what shall I say? These things are so, because these are so deep philosophical things, it is very hard to discuss it, to establish the full context. I don't know whether I'm making sense.
Yeah, you are. I mean, and what really actually just how you explain the form and the function as being one really kind of resonated with me in a couple of different ways.
Yeah. So for example, like on that one, right? See what he's saying is that the word See, the other thing is, like, it's so beautiful. So the word, on one hand, it has the intention, right? On the other hand, it has the sound. By the way, I can't pass up this. You can see the similarity between this and Gita. This is Brahma and Atma being one. And in the beginning, what does Gita say? In the beginning was the sound, Om. So that is actually very analogous to this idea. Yogeshwar, I don't know whether you've been listening. Are you there?
I don't, Yogeshwar?
Let me see. He may be busy,
Yeah, he
or
may have stepped away.
Yeah. Oh, I
But-
think there is some problem with his audio. I think there is his audio is not connected. Okay. But what I'm saying is that it's a very similar idea. You can see that, like, look at your what like if you look at the core of Gita, right? It's saying Brahma and Atma. Atma is your consciousness. And he's saying Tat Tvamasi. Like, I was reading Naneshwari, and he was saying that that if I wanted to compare, if I wanted to give an analogy to, this is Krishna was saying this. If I wanted to give an analogy of what a true yogi is to me, he's saying that he is my Atma. This is like God saying, this is my son. This is the consciousness. This is my consciousness of myself. So it's very analogous to that. So there is very deep similarities between these works at this level. But let's talk about time. So one possibility is I can do this. Probably I can do it on this Friday at 7 p.m. or 7:30 p.m. Does that work for? No,
I can't.
Okay.
I've.
Okay, sure.
Darn it.
That's fine. How about the weekend? This weekend does not work for you, right, Avanik?
No, it doesn't.
Okay. So then we will find something. Maybe, I don't think Monday is going to work. Worst comes to worst, we will do the next weekend. I'm going to continue. I can't stop reading the Aquinas thing. So I'm just going to keep going on Aquinas.
You know what? Every problem has its own solution. Actually, makes a lot more sense if you're thinking about this, about how form and function are as one, and this idea of self-reference. There's a connection there. I have to think about that.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right. So just wanted to share this with you. So I'm really looking forward to this.
That's amazing.
And all these meetups. I'm really excited about the self-improvement series. It's going to be like Avanik, you missed yesterday. The poetry series is off to a great start.
Yeah, I'll be there next Monday.
Yeah, it was amazing. And I think the self-improvement series also is going to be very good. And I'm trying to expand. I'm going to use those two series to increase the number of people. I've deliberately kind of held back on marketing in order to create like this really close-knit culture that we have. But I feel comfortable now to kind of keep expanding that a little bit. I think we are able to. I think Joe, as a moderator, you feel comfortable if there are more people whom.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's like, I think we have our rules very clear. If there are lots of new people, we have to just repeat the rules for them, and then just deal with that. All right. Wonderful. See,
I'm excited about Thursday too. I'm excited about just seeing John again. I haven't seen him forever.
Yeah. So that's going to be good.
Do you know what he's leading? What book he's leading it on by any chance?
This time I don't think he's using a book, because what I'm doing is that I wanted him, because he's the one who started the series. So I thought it would be just fitting for him to inaugurate the new one.
Agreed.
But the focus this time is not going to be, it's going to be crowdsourcing. So I'm going to invite people to talk about any idea that they have personally found useful for them. So we're going to have his presentation about 10 to 15 minutes. Then we will go to anybody who wants to talk about what idea transformed their lives. And then we will go ahead and just go into breakout rooms. We'll make breakout rooms standard part of the meetups. And then after coming back is going to be the fun part. And Joe, I want to make scribal hyperbooks out of everything now.
That's blowing my mind right now. That is actually blowing my mind.
It's very simple. It's very simple. See, what we do is, I have done this for my in-person meetups. I did this once. Like when we were going through a book, what we'll do is that it's just notes, basically. Anybody can keep notes. And we just share the notes, and you just put down, like, do kind of minor edit and just ship the notes you take during the lecture. So it becomes written, and so people can read it and watch videos. And then we take that material, people will interact with it through comments and stuff like that. And then we'll do additional meetups based on that. So just add the written component in.
And I love the questions aspect of it. That's the most important part. That's a different way of, that's a real way of integrating a new way of learning. I mean, that actually creates a curiosity. And also, and I was thinking about this curiosity in general, how do you create that? But by seeing other people's questions, that actually really opens up your mind much more. The way you're talking about doing it, I'm really interested to see how that looks as far as the layout is concerned.
And the good thing is that this one is far more structured, because Mark is very structured in his thinking, and he's very organized. He's very, he knows the field amazingly well. He knows many things amazingly well. So he's going to be presenting, and then I'm glad it was just like a brainwave of mine, with Peter doing the notes. He types very fast. Peter.
Oh, I can imagine.
So he can type much faster than what people can talk. So so then he will type, and he's very good. He also understands the topic. So the notes are going to be quite good. And so with just minimal edits, we'll be able to just publish it. And then it'll be interesting to see how the interaction, because it's like we have these live meetups and we have YouTube, right? Both those actually work very well. It's like, you do something and then people can go and look it up later on. And now, in addition to that, you have the written thing. And now you will have comments, and then we'll have additional meetups based on that. Okay, these questions keep coming up, so we need to do more meetups on this. And those again go back into the writing, or again go back into the YouTube videos. So it's like really exploring a topic. So it's
that sounds amazing. I don't know how you guys came up with that format, but that's fantastic. I really don't. I mean, that's fantastic. That is.
Yep.
I'm looking forward to it.
We'll see. We'll see.
I think honestly that for me would have changed the way I've learned all the way growing.
Joe, you're not dead yet. So you can always learn.
Thank you for that reminder. Thank you for that reminder. I needed that. That is great. That's a great line. That's awesome.
All right, Jill. See you. And bye, Evanik. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you, Shrikant.
Bye.
It all sounds
Bye-bye.
amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Sorry.
Oh, hey, no problem. Take care. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Hey, night, Penny.
Good night, Penny.
Until
Say hi to Brian for
yeah,
us.
exactly. Well, you beat me to it. Evan.
Yes. He always just starts out and then
Aw,
he just
poor
gets-
guy.
yeah.
So now
Still
I'm
recovering.
Oh, is he? Is he still feeling some of the effects?
Yeah, I mean, he gets really tired. That's,
That's part of it.
Yeah, I heard this. Yeah, a lot of people said even with the Omicron, that's a part of it. You just get really tired.
yeah.
So,
So pretty good from about 11 to 5. That's it.
well,
Well, then
I
he's better
hope-
than I am because I'm not even good during those hours. So I don't know what my excuse is. I didn't have COVID, so. Well, obviously we miss him because obviously I know how long it is since I hadn't seen him. So like,
I
soon as-
thought we weren't going to talk about that.
Yeah, it was 10. I said, I knew it was 10 days. I was like, oh, it's 10 days since I've seen Brian. It's like, yeah, it's kind of creepy. But I was
I thought we weren't going to talk about that, Penny, but
Yeah,
clearly
yeah.
he brought it back up again.
That's right. He's still missing him.
Yeah,
That's what it is, I think.
I definitely am.
Yeah.
Well, everybody, I hope to see you this. Well, I don't know when I'll see you. Probably this weekend or tomorrow or Thursday.
You'll see me next Monday, maybe Sunday if I get back in time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, text me about what your plans are. So.
Yeah, I will.
All right, everyone. Have a great evening.
Have a great evening.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.